we've also seen institutional pressure being placed on a potential incoming Marine Le Pen presidency. And we see this through the central bank, the European Central Bank, where they have been playing around with bond rate prices to try to cause market instability, which sounds, without all of the background, very conspiratorial. However, it seems to be that this is the same playbook that the Bank of England used on Liz Truss. For all of her faults, there definitely seemed to be some kind of political establishment, financial establishment stitch up there to make sure she couldn't succeed with her market policies. What is exactly going on here, and why is it that the current ruling political class will even consider doing such a thing like sending your own country into recession to remain in power?
I think it's a combination of a number of different things, because you have the attempt by the French establishment to thwart the election of the RN. So that's kind of a domestic internal pressure. But then you have to remember, there's also the Brussels bureaucracy, the bureaucrats there, who are no less worried about this possible development. And they've been in the forefront of using the European Central Bank as a medium through which they can create a certain degree of economic instability as a way of blackmailing the French population. So what the ECB is doing is essentially sending out the message that if you dare vote for the RN, and if you're an RN government, then we'll do our best to make sure that your economy will be in big trouble. We're going to make sure that you're going to have to pay back your debt, sort of sooner rather than later. And we're going to ensure that, in terms of investment possibilities, in terms of economic relationships, you're going to be pushed against the wall. So it's a classical example of economic terrorism, in a sense, where you're using the lever of power you have over the financial system, in particular over the bond markets and elsewhere, as a way of ensuring that your target has got no choice but to basically give in. And that's a very powerful weapon. And that's a powerful weapon that I'm sure they'll use even if Bardella gets elected. So they're not going to have an easy time once they get elected, because the European Central Bank will be demanding that Bardella plays according to their sort of playbook. And that's something that we'll just have to watch.
And I suppose one of the final strands that have been pulled on institutionally, and this isn't specific to France, but the French election was triggered by the European Parliament elections and that surge towards the populist sovereigntist parties, is since then we've seen that the European Commission and various other high-ranking officials from across the EU nation states who weren't part of that particular surge, they sit very much on the establishment, have since given Ursula von der Leyen an additional term, and they seem to be trying to frustrate any potential movement in the orientation politically, ideologically of the Commission, the European Parliament. How effective can that be? Does that effectively thwart any meaningful change at that supranational EU level?
I think it does, because the Commission is the Commission. It's inhabited by people who are there for life. Whatever happens in terms of any election, that's not going to make the slightest bit of difference in terms of the composition of the different divisions within the bureaucracy. They're still going to be the same people who are committed to their own values, who are institutionally loyal to the European Commission, that kind of federalist imperium that they've devoted their lives to. So that's not going to change. All that can happen is that as you have more and more people elected who are skeptical or questioning what the European Commission does, that will, in a sense, temper some of their ambitions. And the best that we can hope for is that if now that you have a different composition in the parliament and you have very clear message being sent out about what people in Europe want, all that we can hope for is that the Commission will step back a little bit. And we already seen signs of that in relation to the Green Deal, the way in which they basically said that certain of these horrible green ideological policies that they were promoting are going to be suspended for a while. They're not going to be implemented. I think we can see potential a little bit more of that. But by and large, the Commission is the Commission, and that's not going to change unless there's a much greater political upheaval occurring through elections, which hopefully might happen in the next 4 or 5 years.
It does seem, if you look quite far back in European politics, that this attempt to remain in power and to keep steering the same course in the face of this political resistance, as it were, in its actual sense of the word, that they're delaying the inevitable somewhat. So I'll use Geert Wilders as an example. At the beginning of the 2000s, he was obviously popular with a relatively small subset of the Dutch population, but he was considered beyond the pale outside of those circles, indeed in the United Kingdom. And I know Douglas Murray made this point recently where he spoke about how in the 2000s, when the Labour government blocked his entry into Britain as being someone who wouldn't be conducive to the social good because of his policies and his thoughts on Islam and Europe, he is now effectively the de facto head of the Netherlands government. And whilst he realised that he wouldn't be acceptable as a prime minister, he's effectively pulling the strings. And if that's the trajectory that we're on, and we look at Jordan Bardella and some of the policies he's proposed, he's already playing around with foreign nationals' children not automatically getting nationality just because they have been born on French soil. He's talking about, as far as I can see, he's talking about the deportation of foreign nationals who've been economically inactive for 6 months. It seems that even if there's some way of suppressing this now, there's some way of torpedoing this movement, is that if you just carry on the status quo and you keep pushing on with all of the globalization policies, the mass immigration, all of the things we've spoken about, that in the end, the tidal wave is coming. It's just trying to find a way of they're just trying to find any way of breaking that tidal wave they can, but to limited effect. Do you think that it's coming, whether it is thwarted now or not?
Well, I think what's happening, what you're describing, is that the attempt to put certain political parties and movements under quarantine and isolating them, and basically saying that these political parties cannot be part of respectable society. They cannot appear on the media. They're not to be taken seriously as proper political actors. This policy, which worked for a very long time, for the last 20, 25 years, basically is gradually unraveling more and more. And it means that in many parts of Europe, political parties that could not have a voice on the media or who were entirely isolated and basically regarded as beyond the pale, are now gradually coming into what is the mainstream of political life. Now, it's happening, but it's meeting with ferocious resistance. And I don't know if you noticed, but one of the ways in which there's an attempt to resist this development is to label any political party that is, in a sense, conservative or right-wing as hard right, far right, extreme right, to try to basically demonize them and suggest that somehow they're not unlike the political parties that existed in Germany in the 1930s, that kind of politics of fear being weaponized quite systematically. But I think the interesting thing is that gradually people are become weary and skeptical of this particular ploy. And what we're finding is that this quarantine is no longer working. It's lost its effect. and therefore you can no longer basically cut off these parties. There are still some parties in Europe that suffer from that haven't been able to break through because this attempt to insulate society from their influence is still working. But it's only a matter of time before this basic strategy, what I call insulating democracy from people you don't like politically, is going to break down.